We know customers want control. It's non-negotiable now, but how do we enable them to feel like they have the control? What does it take from a data and analytics standpoint to make this a reality? We are joined in studio by a brilliant guest who's going to talk us through just that. Welcome back to the festival, JoAnn. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Catherine. How are you? And congratulations on the festival again. It's great to be with you all.
Oh, it's amazing to have you back, and I'm going to embarrass you in front of everyone and say that you were our most highly reviewed speaker from our last edition. So I knew I had to confirm you again because people just
Wow.
absolutely loved what you had to say. Yeah, I didn't tell you before we hit record because I
No,
wanted to make sure I could say it now.
I did not
Um,
know. I did not know at all. But the festival is always fun, and so I'm glad that people appreciated what I had to say. So I'm fresh back from holiday in Europe, so hopefully I have some interesting things to say this go round as well. So good to be
well,
here.
no doubt you haven't let the ideas of data sit there for too long whilst you've been on vacation for sure. And I mean, we're talking here about one of your favorite topics as well, the customers. I know from all of the work we've done together on the leading female exec panels and the festivals and other content that you and I collaborate on, that customers and keeping them front of mind for you is something that you're constantly thinking about. Now, I chose the title in a very purposeful way of that visualization of keeping customers there. We'll get onto that in a moment. We know that they want control of their data, but how in reality are we able to enable them to do that at the moment? I wonder if you could give me some flavor to that.
Sure. Mastercard is really a B2B company, right? But we work with our merchants, our banks, governments, right? And other organizations as they really think about their data as well as the data that we process for them. But we really start with keeping the individual customer in mind, right? Because it really does start with all of us as individuals. And then what we want, right, as customers or citizens, right? As we really want different services from different organizations. And so it's really a tension sometimes between what we want from a different organization, right, as we interact with them. But that tension builds as we want them to know us, and yet we don't want to give them too much of our data, right? So there's this tension between privacy and security on one hand, and yet customization on the other hand. And so how much data do I want any one organization to have about me? And yet I do want customized service. And so how does any organization balance that? And I think our approach for many, many years has been just really make sure that as you're designing your service, your solution, by putting the individual at the center of your design challenge or what you're trying, that service that you're trying to provide. And I think that has really always been our North Star as we work with all of the different organizations that we work with. And as we look at the data that we process, we collect, and that we build products and solutions from. So I think that's really how you have to approach this, right? So how will the individual feel as you think about that product or service that you're designing?
I love that you chose to use the word tension there because I think it provides such a visual element to this negotiation that customers, patients, clients, however it is in your organization, that relationship, as you say, and I've definitely commented on it before, the fact that we all have very different relationships with different brands, etc. What you're happy for your healthcare provider to know versus, the local shop and retailer where you go and buy your meal deal at lunchtime. It's going to be a very different relationship as well.
Absolutely. And we want, right? We want a certain recognition if we're loyal, right? If we're a loyal customer, right? I got on an airline just yesterday, right? And as a loyal customer, it was very nice to be recognized with a handwritten note, right? When I
Mm.
sat down, right? Before all of my loyalty of really flying that airline, I got a lovely handwritten note from the cabin crew, right? And obviously that is a way of the airline recognizing me for all of my business, right? But it felt very, very congruent, if you will, with all of the miles that I have flown on that airline. It might
Mhm.
not have felt so if they had done something else, right? So again, how do you make sure that it feels personable and it feels right for them to understand how long and how often I have flown with them, right? So that's a good positive use of the data. Whereas if they had done, I don't know, something else, it might not have felt quite so good as a loyal customer.
100%. And then just revisiting what I mentioned there about different brands having that relationship. I'm sure there's many organizations and companies that you use that if you had a similar sort of handwritten note, you'd be a bit like, well, that's a bit creepy that you're keeping
Right, because
such
I
a
don't know
close
them that
eye.
way. Right. I
Yeah.
don't know you like that, right? I mean, that's kind of the phrase that, you can use, right? If I know you like that, well, that's great. But if I don't, why are you giving me a note? I don't know you, right? And that's
Yeah.
also, and again, with that security tension, right? That's how, right, bad actors prey upon us, right? They act as if they do know you, and you realize, well, wait a minute, I don't know you, and I don't expect you to know me that way. And it's how the elderly get preyed upon, right? I think of my elderly mom, right? She calls me all the time. She's like, I got this note, but I don't have a bank account with XYZ Bank. Why are they
Mhm.
sending something to me? And I'm like, Mom, it's a scam. Delete the email, right? So
Yeah.
it works both ways. Hence the tension that we all have to kind of work through
Mm.
in this space.
Mm. Now, obviously, as you mentioned, you're very much focused B2B, but I do know you are such a fantastic networker. And I'm going to do a call to the audience now. If you need to chat to someone who is amazing at getting out there and understanding the community, then JoAnn is your person to reach out to and ask for top hot tips, which is definitely another session in the future. But on that same light, you speak to so many people in the market across various industries. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges for keeping customers in control from a practical point of view, from a theoretical point of view, from an ethical point of view, whichever you want to dip in from? What would you say are the kind of big themes that you're seeing amongst the wider market?
So I think the market really is trying to make sure that they understand their customers, right? I think that one of the things that I think all data officers, data and analytic officers are trying to make sure that they focus on is how can I truly understand my customers and make them feel special, right? Mastercard offers a wide range of services for our B2B customers. We do a lot of work with test and learn, right, with our customers to make sure that they understand what are you designing for, and how can we really make sure that their data is understood, right? So how to use data to really do those marketing campaigns, do those loyalty campaigns, those loyalty services. We just purchased some additional companies that are going to round out our ability to help organizations understand that kind of 360 view of your customer and those solutions. So I do think that is never going to change, right? Because I do think that individuals do want to have those relationships. But I do think that it's very principles based, the solutions that we offer, right? So we designed, and I've talked about this for quite a long time, our data responsibility principles, right? That have that baseline of privacy and security that I've already mentioned, but really have, encourage organizations to have transparent data practices, right? So that individuals do know how to interact with organizations, right? So that they know how they're using data, that they know that the organization is going to be accountable with their data, and that they can interact and ask the questions of, well, how are you using my data? What are your data practices? How long do you retain it? How do you destroy it, right? What organizations are you sharing the data with, right? Things along those lines, and that you're going to innovate with the data. And then, of course, increasingly, I think one of the issues that organizations are coming to is what are the challenges of using tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? And how is that tool and technique changing the game of data and data science? And so what's the transparency around artificial intelligence and the data practices in that area? And that's where I think data ethics has to be amped up, and the review of the data practices is a little bit different, and data review boards are coming into the forefront. We're really encouraging organizations to make sure that they're using inclusive data sets in that area. And so having that really be the forefront of what is needed as well, right? So making sure that you have the right data for the problem that you're solving, and that you don't use too narrow a data set. So I think all of those things are really areas that organizations, ever since COVID really started, I think data practices are getting much more mature to make sure that you're using the right data to solve the right problem, the problem that you're really trying to solve, and develop the right solution.
few things I want to pick up on that point there as well. And you mentioned about the transparency piece, which I think so many organizations are working hand in hand with their comms and marketing team to ensure that it is absolutely crystal clear what's being done. And often I think about it, it's a bit like in our personal lives with house insurance or car insurance or roadside assistance. We don't maybe know where all our policies are until you're at the side of the road with a broken down car and you're suddenly thinking, oh gosh, what's the process here? And I think for some data teams, it can feel a bit like that as well, that when someone comes to you with a question and says, how is this data being stored, or where is the location of this one customer's data? It can feel a bit like, oh goodness, what is the process? But actually, it's better to have that all lined up and understood ahead of those questions being asked, so that you have that very transparent, very quick and timely way of answering those questions, which then restores that trust and faith in a brand, in a response to any form of kind of data breach or situation that may have asked these questions. But that in itself can be very challenging, right? Because especially in an organization as large as yours, that could be quite a complex answer as well. I mean, I wonder if you could add a bit of flavor to that.
Well, sure. And I do think that organizations are realizing, I mean, there's again, the tension between data regulation that's happening, right? As well as good data practices, as well as what customers are expecting, right? And so how can you take all of those inputs, right? From regulation to customer expectations to just good data practices, and actually build a roadmap for your organization that says, well, customers' expectations of what knowledge they want to have about an organization's data practices, they're only going up. And so are regulations, right? So how do you build your roadmap so that you have better and better data practices? We know you're going to have more data, but realistically, the older data is not as useful as the more recent data, right? So as you create your next generation of data systems, right, and methodologies, why wouldn't you begin to keep better track of your data? Where is it, right? And create the kind of data framework and data governance and data management techniques, right, that are going to help you pull into a data dashboard for a customer or an individual that's able to tell them what data you have, where is it, what systems and processes are you using it for, right? Because more and more organizations are going to be, creating more and more complex data solutions. So you might as well build that into your thinking as you're actually creating your next generation of products and services. It's just actually how I think organizations are going to have to create it because of regulation. Well, why wouldn't you begin to just put that into kind of your product development and your solution development and your systems architecture now, right? It's actually going to be required, I think, within the next few years. So you might as well just do it, right, as part and parcel of your roadmap, your technology and data roadmaps.
Such a great soundbite. Just do it. Absolutely love that. And you mentioned there about the data ethics piece as well. About the fact that we've got to do right by our customers, and that means having inclusive data, as you mentioned. Now, there are a range of people who are joining us in the audience today who are going to have, we're going to have very, very big enterprises through to, kind of one person consultancies. What's your big pieces of advice when it comes to beginning that journey? So it's a case of, okay, you want to have the access to the best data possible. Perhaps it's not as inclusive as it could be, and you want to do right by your customers. What are a couple of starting points you could give to those perhaps on the less mature side?
Sure. So if you think about AI and machine learning, right, it's a really new tool for everybody, but it's really exciting because it allows you to form a question and then look at the data set and say, okay, right, what does the data tell us about this issue? But the challenge is that the data set hasn't necessarily been created to solve that problem, right? So I use the example all the time of the 1910 voter rolls in the United States, right? Well, it's a great data set, except it wouldn't include women. It doesn't include people of color. So you're going to be missing some key characteristics for today's population. So if you only want to design something for white men, well, that's fine then, and that may be your chosen audience. But if it's not your chosen audience, then you need to make sure that you understand the data set that you're feeding the AI and machine learning, right? Andrew Ng has a great quote that says, data is the food for artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think as data scientists, we have to get really, really smart about kind of going back and forth between the algorithms and the data, right? And making sure that we understand what information are we using to feed the algorithms, right? And we also have to make sure that we're structuring the algorithms in the right way to make sure that our inquiries are not also biased, right? So we hear a lot about bias, but the reason that we're talking about this as a science is to make sure the outcome, right, that product, that service, that solution is actually accurate, so that as we have true machine learning and eventually real artificial intelligence, we're actually having the machine learn the right thing, right? And so that's really what I think everybody has to begin to work on, okay? And so that is really even if you're a one person shop working with machine learning and artificial intelligence, you need to understand the data you're using, the algorithms you're creating, but really what is the final outcomes and what are the flat sides of those outcomes as you're applying it to the data set that you know, but then potentially any other data set that could be actually applied to.
Yeah, some great pieces of advice there. Now, when it came to, and I mentioned this at the top of the conversation, when it came to designing this session, I wanted the very visual idea of the customer being in the cockpit, in charge of the destination of their data, but also allowing to pivot as well. Now, I don't know about you, JoAnn, but in my personal life, data comes up quite a lot outside of work, whether it's in people's jobs or they're now having to do training. I get it. I hear a lot about training, and I think, well, yeah, I know who's leading that training. I speak to them regularly. And it seems that the growing awareness of data, of how it's being used, how it's being stored, is increasing. The literacy of the everyday person is increasing, I think. What do you think we can do with this? And do you think there's any particular influences behind that awareness? And is there a way we can harness that and do something with it that's potentially quite productive and cool?
I do. I mean, first of all, I think it's great that more and more people are aware. I think the challenge is that the world's getting more complicated, right? So the awareness, how do we make it easy for the average individual to engage without making them click through dozens of privacy notices that, let's face it, not everybody's reading? So how do we make dashboards and real-time interactions more, more part of the experience so that individuals can say, oh, yes, I want this, and I understand the data I am trading for it. So I do think you're going to see that evolution happening, because we also are seeing that, there are going to be probably more data dashboards, as we're calling it, where you're going to be able to go in and say yes and no more interactively over time. Yes, I want this for a while. No, I don't want it anymore. I think you're going to see that as well. But I do think that part and parcel of your experience of interacting with different organizations, you're going to see more interaction happening as part of the data experience, because consumers, right, are becoming more used to that interaction of, my data is required for this. I'm okay for giving it for that purpose. I'm even okay for a second purpose, but I'm not okay for the third. And so I do think that's going to be the change in what we're going to see. And even more so as we begin to see the world evolve into the metaverse, right? And as augmented reality and virtual reality become part and parcel of how we interact with each other as we go forward over the next 3 to 5 years.
I couldn't agree more. And I think a few of the brands that I've touched base with on various different things in my job, I am always impressed when you click through to unsubscribe an email and you do have the ability to do it. Because it is a case of, say, for me, news and updates. Yeah, I really want to know that. Do I want to know about products, selling, buying? I'm not in the market right now, so no, freeze that for 6 months, but come back to me potentially in the future. That sort of segmentation is so great, and I'm excited to see more do that as well. Now, we only have 1 or 2 minutes left here today, JoAnn, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind finishing our talk today with perhaps one thing you want our audience to be really thinking about as they leave our conversation today, all about keeping the customer in the cockpit.
I think we have to realize that we are living in a time of great change, even as we've experienced a lot of change right now. And so the one thing I would say is this: I think that we all, as data professionals, have the obligation to really, to one of the points you touched on earlier, Catherine, we have the obligation to continue to teach through this change, and to recognize that even as we have tried to make it simpler and simpler, as the world continues to evolve, evolve, there's going to be even more of a need to continue to teach. And so I think as data professionals, we have to make it part and parcel of what we do every day to make what we do simpler and easier for people to understand, so that the individual does feel like they're in control, that they feel like they can engage, and that we continue to design with individuals in mind, because everything we do touches people and will touch our society in such a significant way. And hopefully we continue to do that in a way that's very ethical and truthful and stops misinformation from creeping into our society in really negative ways.
Amazing. JoAnn, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me again.